Hi, my name is Amelia. I'm from the Ellenville Public Library and Museum, and welcome to today's program, Mood Boosters, with our wonderful presenter, Courtney Edwards. All right, take it away.
Thank you so much. My name is Courtney Edwards. I am the owner and coach at Solavi Holistic. I work in the field of behavioral health coaching and mindfulness and meditation. Today, we are talking about mood boosters. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and a lot of our programming recently has been focused on kind of, things that people struggle with and different mental health conditions. And we decided for this month that we were going to put a little bit more positive spin on it and talk about the ways that you can influence your own mental health in positive ways. So we're going to talk about neurochemistry, and I'm not an expert in that field, so it's not going to be too sciencey. I'm going to keep it nice and accessible for folks because it's the way that I approach it. And we're going to talk a little bit about some different therapeutic interventions as well that you can really do kind of on your own to help improve mood. And I just have to get my screen to change. There we go. So I just said all this. We're going to talk a little bit about how the brain works and how that influences our moods from day to day. And then we're going to talk about different ways that you can actually increase or promote the different neurochemicals that are connected to happiness and to feeling good, because there are things that you can do in your daily life that will help just boost those naturally occurring chemicals in the brain. And then we had hoped to be able to talk a little bit about different options that folks have already employed in their life. But if even without a robust discussion today, just to kind of take a second and maybe process what we've covered and think about ways that you are already doing these things in your life so that you can identify maybe just an opportunity to do more of those things. So, we are going to talk first about how happiness works. It is definitely something that is within us. It's not something that comes from outside. Happiness exists in our sense of self, and then very specifically and very concretely in the chemistry of our brain. And so we can use that as a foundation to promote happiness in our own lives. The other thing that we're going to talk a lot about today, aside from just sort of the neurology of it, is looking at happiness from a cognitive perspective. So there is a framework of psychology called cognitive behavioral therapy. And it aligns a lot with meditation and mindfulness, which is one of the reasons that it's a really attractive way of working with folks for me, because it kind of integrates both parts of my background, being trained as a mental health clinician and also as a meditation instructor. This framework of a cognitive perspective, it helps, they merge together really nicely. And what they both say, cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness, kind of the underlying message for both of them is that it's not exactly what happens to us that causes us unhappiness. It's the way that we react to it, most significantly, the way that we think about it. And when we start thinking about things in just kind of chronically negative ways and overtly negative ways, something bad happens and your mind automatically goes to like, oh, this is awful, and awful things always happen to me, and so it's always going to be awful. And what that does is it creates a habitual thought pattern, and then you're more likely to go to that as your immediate response the next time something bad happens. And over time, that becomes a habit. And then it almost becomes like a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you think that bad things are going to happen all the time, then the chances are more likely that they will. So there is a technique that I'm going to teach that helps you start to recognize those thoughts when they happen and kind of stop that thought process. as you recognize it, and then learn ways to kind of approach things with more positivity. And it's important to recognize that that doesn't mean that we're just going to put like a happy spin on everything and pretend that bad things don't happen. But it's just a way of kind of being aware of how much your own reaction, particularly the thoughts that you have around a situation, kind of perpetuate it. So bad things can happen and you can still be okay. And that's what this kind of intervention tries to help you achieve. Is it's not saying that bad things never happen and that you have to kind of put a happy spin on everything. It's really just saying that even in the face of difficulty, that you can still kind of stay steady, and be aware of how your reaction to the situation can help yourself a little bit. So the first thing that we're going to talk about are neurotransmitters. And again, I'm going to try to keep this really simple, and explain it the way that I understand it. Perhaps somebody who is a professional neuroscientist would come in and say, that was just the tip of the iceberg, but that's okay, because that's all we need to deal with today is just the tip of the iceberg. So our neurology, our brain, our nervous system, our spinal cord, all of that is a system that permeates the entire body and is composed of cells. I'm not going to get into a ton of detail about the structure of those cells, other than to say that the important part that we need to focus on are kind of the ends of nerve cells, which look a little bit like trees. And I'm going to use this analogy throughout. So you have two sets of nerve cells, and they both have kind of these tree branch like endings on them. And there's a space in between them called the synapse. And neurotransmitters are the chemicals that that allow one electrical impulse to go from one set of cells across the synapse into the other set of cells. So it's the neurochemical that allows transmission from one tree to the other tree. And so we're going to kind of think of neurotransmitters as like a little, the what propels the squirrel, right? If you think about the tops of trees, look at the canopy and think about a squirrel that jumps from one set of branches to the other. That's the electrical impulse. And neurotransmitters are, all of the squirrel's energy and the air and all the things that allow the squirrel to make that transmission. Those are neurotransmitters. So they are chemicals, they are naturally occurring in the body, and they are responsible for a lot of different functions. So not only do they propel electrical impulses from one cell body to another, but then they also play a directive role in the things that we do. So some neurotransmitters are responsible for bodily functions, keeping our heart beating, digestion, elimination, all those types of things that our body does when our body is doing what it does. Some of them are responsible, or some of them can be responsible for multiple things. So kind of bodily functions is one area. Motor function is another. So actually more intentional movement in the ways that we move our bodies. And then also moods and feelings. And so that's the component that we're going to focus on today, are the very specific neurotransmitters that have an impact on our moods and the way that we feel and how those things relate to our behaviors. And then, as I mentioned before, we're going to talk about the relationship between the things that we think and how that influences the way that we feel and the ways that we behave, and how those things will drive our mood and our behavior. So we are going to learn to kind of hack happiness by learning about the four major feel-good neurotransmitters, and how we can boost them. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to do an exercise that's going to learn how to also address kind of that more cognitive part of our brain, to change the way we think about negative things. But the feel good neurotransmitters that we're going to talk about today include endorphin, oxytocin, serotonin, and dopamine. And you maybe have heard about some or all of these, but we're going to kind of explore a little bit about what they are and how they work. So, endorphin is a chemical that is generated by activity and is related to feelings of euphoria. The word endorphin actually breaks down to mean morphine of the body. And so it does mimic an opiate like experience in that it helps reduce pain. Again, it kind of brings on that euphoric feeling. It's often described by runners, the runner's high, that some runners are lucky enough. I don't always get the runner's high, but that is that sensation of just, if you've gone out and had a great workout and you're just feeling really good, and it makes, big mood booster, you're feeling really happy, feeling really great, really energized. That is endorphin. Oxytocin is also called the cuddle hormone, and it is produced largely through touch. So that's one of the reasons that it has earned that name. And it is related to um, building trust and bonding, creating generosity and feelings of connection. So it's really a significant driver in relationship building. And then you can take that kind of avenue and look at all of the ways that fulfilling and connected, trusting relationships build well-being within individuals. We're wired to be connected. And so when we have an opportunity to spend time with people that we love, and we're feeling all of that oxytocin in our brain, it inspires feelings of happiness and just, really kind of feeling good about how things are. It's also really beneficial in regulating our stress response. And so it can, not only does oxytocin boost its own good feelings, but it can help us kind of manage and regulate a negative feeling. And so it helps in two ways in that way. Serotonin is also called the happiness hormone. It's primarily found in the gut and produced in the intestines, which is a helpful time to kind of mention that in the field of neuroscience, there's often considered to be a first brain and a second brain, and the second brain is the gut. There is a lot of just a lot of our feelings, a lot of our health and wellness is oriented in what's called the enteric nervous system. And that is focused in the stomach and the digestive tract. So, one of the things that you'll see come up in the next slide is how diet plays a huge role in kind of increasing these feel good hormones. Um, Serotonin aids in mood stability, feelings of happiness and well being, and it impacts digestion, sleep, and sexual function. So, a couple months ago, we did a workshop on seasonal affective disorder. And one of the tie ins with that is that serotonin can be produced at greater quantities in the body when there is access to sunlight. And so in the darker, colder winter months, we don't have as much time outside, we don't have as much time exposed to sunlight. And so that can actually cause a drop in serotonin, which can lead to feelings of sadness and emptiness. And then on a clinical side, things like depression. You may also know the word serotonin from antidepressant medications. So, one of the things that happens with our brain chemistry is as a neurotransmitter is kind of injected into the brain, it is then absorbed back in a process that's called reuptake. And so people who have clinical depression often reuptake their serotonin too quickly or in too great of an amount. And so they don't get the benefit of that happiness that comes with serotonin. And so, one class of antidepressant medication is called SSRIs, which is selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So what that medication actually does is it makes the brain slow down the amount of serotonin it's reuptaking so that the person actually gets the benefit of having some serotonin, which is going to help relieve some of those feelings of darkness and sadness and emptiness that go along with depression. So if you've heard of SSRIs, that's kind of just a quick overview of how they work. And then finally, dopamine is the feel good hormone. It is related to our pleasure systems. It is a chemical that is released when we do something that we want more of. And so it's related to motivation in that you get like a little dopamine hit when you have something that is perceived as a reward, and then it motivates you to go back and do more of that. So dopamine makes you feel good. Dopamine is also tied to some negative things like addiction and addictive behaviors. It's important to kind of recognize that relationship too, because what happens is it's that dopamine reward in the brain that sometimes will motivate somebody to engage in behaviors that are maybe less desirable. So it's kind of thinking of it as the dopamine itself doesn't understand ethics or morality or uh, pro-social behavior or anything like that. It just knows like that made me feel good, so we're going to do more of that. And sometimes the thing that it's making you feel good about is maybe a behavior that you don't want to engage in. It's also tied a lot to social media. So they have found that seeing that little notification that somebody liked your status or liked your picture on Instagram has a dopamine hit very similar to folks who gamble or engage in drug or alcohol use or any other desirable behavior. So if you're ever wondering, why is it that you can't stop scrolling? It's because your brain is telling you that it's a good thing and you should keep going back and doing that. And so using a little bit of mindfulness and just being aware of that can be helpful in finding different ways to get that same reward in your mind. So, but it is also produced in the gut. And so we're going to talk a lot about how food and diet play into being able to increase dopamine in a healthy way. So, in order to increase these feelings, I've just created a little checklist of kind of everyday things that you can incorporate in your life that will naturally help increase these very important neurochemicals. You'll see that some of them show up for a couple of different neurochemicals. And so those might be things that you want to explore because they're going to hit on a couple different levels. But as I mentioned with endorphin, rigorous exercise is tied to the production of that neurochemical. So running or any other kind of aerobic exercise that feels good for you might be something that you would want to do. Also chocolate, particularly dark chocolate, has been tied to the production of endorphins. So, maybe you go for a run and then you come back and treat yourself to some chocolate. Just laughing will produce endorphins. So, if you have an opportunity to, watch something funny or spend time with funny people, but just the act of laughing, having sex will increase endorphin, dancing, creating art or being creative in whatever way is available to you. And then also acupuncture has the capacity to increase endorphin production in the body. For dopamine, looking at protein in the body, in the diet, and then also being mindful of decreasing saturated fats can help produce dopamine, as well as integrating some probiotics. And again, I'm not a nutritionist, so if you have specific questions about how to do that, it might be something that you would want to talk to your doctor or a nutrition expert on. But you can also just look at what's available, just explore kind of how your diet is at this point and see if there's some changes that you can make to increase the good protein and decrease those saturated fats. Exercise is also connected to dopamine. However, studies have found more moderate and short term exercise. Um, One of the studies I saw said 15 to 20 minutes of moderate exercise is the best for dopamine production. And then after 20 minutes, they found that it actually stopped producing dopamine at that point. So if that's specifically something that you're looking to increase in your life, then you would maybe not want to go running, but maybe that would be a walk or a hike or a bike ride, or some other less intense type of exercise. Also, yoga to that end is tied to the dopamine production. Getting good sleep, engaging in meditation, and listening to music. So those are all things that you can just do in your everyday that don't need anything special, to just kind of get out there and go for a walk, get some good sleep, maybe meditate a little bit, and see if you can increase that feel good hormone. Oxytocin, as I mentioned, the cuddle hormone, is connected to physical touch. And so having an opportunity to spend time with loved ones and having that close proximity will help boost that. But so will petting a furry friend. So if you have a cat or a dog or a bunny or some other furry pal that you can pet, that also will release oxytocin in the brain. Again, yoga is effective in this area. Listening to music, getting a massage, or giving a massage. They both have some positive impact on oxytocin production. And then just spending time with loved ones can produce it. Engaging in acts of kindness and generosity will produce oxytocin. So if you think about a time that you've done a good deed and then maybe you've kind of felt a little extra good afterwards, it's because you've gone ahead and flooded your brain with some oxytocin. And then interestingly, just eye contact can be a helpful way to produce oxytocin. And so, looking at people, in the eye when you talk to them, when you're out in public, running errands, making eye contact with folks, not in a creepy way, of course, but I always think about, like, when you go to the cash register in the grocery store, do you make eye contact with the cashier when you say hello? Or are you, kind of just fumbling around and looking for your debit card, and but just taking that second to just make eye contact and say hello to somebody. And then finally, serotonin is again related to exercise and, as I mentioned, sunshine and light exposure. So we talked a lot about different types of light exposure during the seasonal affective disorder workshop, but it can be artificial light if it's the appropriate kind of UV therapeutic light, but otherwise sunshine and also fresh air. So they kind of go together. So trying to get outside, taking walks in nature can produce serotonin. Massage also will produce this neurochemical, and paying attention to your diet. There are serotonin supplements, although I will say I don't know a lot about them. And you can go too far with serotonin. There's a condition called the serotonin syndrome, which is an excess of serotonin in the brain. And so if you are looking at supplements, I would highly recommend that you do so under the guidance of a medical professional, because you want to make sure that you're doing something that is good and healthy and right for your body, not just some information that you found on the internet. So but that's my disclaimer. So, but those are, like I said, I wanted to put together a list of things that are readily available for a lot of folks, not anything that you need to go spend a ton of money on or that's going to take a lot of time out of your schedule. Maybe these are things that you're already doing and you just didn't realize what good impact they had on your brain and your happiness levels. And now that you know, you can maybe make, an effort to do them more regularly, and just really be aware of that positive influence. If you're sitting there petting your puppy, like, then just be like, oh, I'm getting some oxytocin right now, and just kind of knowing that that's what's happening in your body can also help make it more impactful. And so, beyond kind of hacking our neurotransmitters, what else can we do? And so, I wanted to talk a little bit about the other part of our brain, which is kind of that more thought based center of our brain. And so, we're going to talk a little bit about cognitive behavioral therapy. So, this is a therapeutic intervention that's been around since the 1950s and 1960s and talks a lot about how we think and the way that our thoughts impact our mood and behavior, and particularly how over time these thoughts become automatic and habitual. And so they start to kind of come into our minds. We don't even realize it's happening. It's just that's just kind of the way that you think now, because it becomes so deeply ingrained. And so those habitual automatic thoughts create a lens through which you then begin to see the world. And so if your thoughts kind of are habitually negative, and you start to anticipate things to be negative, and it creates this negative filter. So then everything you experience is coming at you through this lens of negativity, and obviously that's going to bring some mental well-being issues, in that you might not be able to access feelings of happiness or gladness or joy because everything has come to you through kind of this lens of negativity. So, what cognitive behavioral therapy helps us learn to do is to flip the script. And we do have the ability to do that. It takes time and it takes patience because, again, depending on your age and how long you've been experiencing these negative thought patterns, they may be really deeply ingrained, very habitual. And so you might need to practice. But one of the things that I really like about cognitive behavioral therapy is the fact that it is action oriented. You can do this. There are worksheets. You can do it in a journal. There are therapeutic books that you can buy in bookstores that are kind of workbook oriented that help you learn to kind of recognize these negative thoughts, right? Because that's kind of the first part. You have to recognize that they're happening. And then it teaches you the tools to kind of reframe them, which is to take this negative thought that you might have had and kind of figure out a way to think about it with a little bit more positivity. And then that is going to shape your thoughts or your feelings and your behaviors in a more positive way. So this framework is often called the ABCD model. Um, A is the activating event. And so this is just a thing that happens in the world. It's just a thing that you encounter. Maybe your car breaks down. So that is the activating event. B is the belief that you have about the event. And those beliefs are created through those automatic habitual thoughts and the kind of the story that you tell yourself about what is happening. So your car breaks down, and maybe your first thought is, this is awful, and awful things always happen to me, and I'm such a loser, and I can't believe that this is happening, and it's overwhelming. And so you're just flooded with all of this negativity based on the way that you're viewing the situation that happened, right? um, and maybe it's super inconvenient that your car broke down, but we're going to exaggerate, to kind of go to this, like, it's awful, it's a catastrophe, this is the worst thing that ever could have happened, my car breaking down. And so the consequence, which is C in this model, is the feelings or the behavior that happen because of these beliefs that you have. So you feel really bad, you're miserable now, you're kind of in this self-loathing pit, or you're angry. Maybe you yell at the person that you're in the car with, and you take it out on them because you're just having a hard time coping with just how bad this feels, this terrible catastrophe of your car breaking down that has happened to you. And so the magic happens in D, which is your ability to dispute that belief. And so this is where kind of a little bit of intention and discipline and practice comes into place, because what happens is you take the situation and you explore it. And you say, okay, my car broke down. And maybe you can get to the place where you could say, this is inconvenient, but I'm okay. We're safe. I have what I need to take care of the situation. Somebody's going to come pick us up, call the tow truck, get the car fixed. This was inconvenient, but I'm okay. And so that's kind of what you want to try to get towards, is being able to take something that happened to you that you had this immediate, overwhelming negative response to, and see if you can just look at it in a slightly different way with a little bit more positivity, because then you think about how you would respond to that differently. So now you're inconvenienced, maybe you're worried, right? These feelings are natural, right? So your car broke down, maybe you're a little bit worried. It's super inconvenient. You're going to be late to an event that you were going to now. But you can kind of manage that from an emotional perspective that's a little bit more even, where you can just acknowledge, like, this is not how I wanted to spend my day, but it's not the end of the world, and I'm going to be okay. And you can start to then practice things like that in all of your life, and start to reshape that lens through which you view the world. So the final step in this model is called E, which would be the more effective way of viewing the situation. So after you dispute kind of all these negative cognitions, these negative thoughts, this negative self-talk that you have about the situation, then you start to create a new one. And that one can be just a little bit more neutral, right? And as I said in the beginning, we're not putting a happy face on everything, right? Nothing in this scenario expects that you're sitting on the side of the road being like, fantastic, my car broke down, awesome, right? Because who feels that way? Almost nobody. But it really is about just kind of creating a little bit of a neutral space and just being like, yes, this is unpleasant, but I'm going to be okay. And see how that can start to also then change the consequence, which is that mood-based and behavioral-based effect that the initial event caused. This lines up with meditation and mindfulness because it's the same philosophy, which is, it's not really what happens to us that causes us distress, it's what we think about it. And you can do this, like I mentioned, there's workbooks that you can get at bookstores or online. There's worksheets that you can find online, or you can just do it through journaling, where you can take a moment to recognize, like, this is the event that happened. What were the beliefs that I had? And you kind of write those down. And then what was the consequence to that belief? How can I dispute that belief? And so you just practice at it till it becomes a little bit more natural. So, one of the really interesting points I wanted to make about how these work, kind of using these two major components of the brain, our biological brain and our thought based brain, but bringing them together under the understanding of neuroplasticity, which is pretty much one of my favorite things about human existence. Neuroplasticity is essentially our ability to wire and shape the brain. So, part of what falls under this heading is the wrinkly surface of the brain, because those are actual, like, that's learning. That's where learning happens, is in those little crinkles and stuff on the surface of the brain. And when we learn something, we create a neural pathway. And through repetition, those neural pathways become more deeply entrenched. And so this is kind of how that automatic thought situation becomes a problem, because you just keep relearning the same kind of negative way. And up until recently, neuroscientists believed that we started to lose neuroplasticity our ability to wire and rewrite the brain somewhere in our mid 20s. They thought around 25, 26. And then there was a drop off, and kind of however your brain was at 26 was how it was going to stay forever. And more recent research has indicated that this is absolutely not true, and that we have the ability to continue to change the surface of our brain, to learn, to change our patterns of behavior and habits, to change our negative thinking well into late life. And so, no matter where you are in your life, no matter how long you have been plagued by kind of this negative thought pattern, you have the ability to make that change. There's no point over the course of the lifespan that our brains lose their ability to learn and to be reshaped or reframed by these types of interventions. And then by actively improving our mood through our own brain chemistry, it just kind of helps propel that along a little bit. We're putting ourselves in a better situation to be able to acknowledge the good, positive things that are in our lives, to refute negative thoughts, and to not be beholden to kind of these habitual thought patterns. But it's almost like it gives us the ability to turn on the light so that we can see things a little bit more clearly. And then we can take control over the way that we think and react to situations. So, as I mentioned, this would typically be the spot where we would talk about things that work for you already in your life and answer questions and share support. But just maybe let this be a prompt to take a moment and think about it. If you think about the lists that we shared, what are some activities that you do in your daily life that you recognized on that list? Maybe it's one of my personal favorites, which is dancing in the kitchen while I'm cooking with some music on. Going out for a run, doing yoga, riding my bike, spending as much time in nature as possible, recognizing that those are not just things that I do, but those are things that I do for my mental well-being. And you can explore the things that you do in your life that help promote your mental well-being too. And maybe you want to think about the way that you could implement the ABCD model into your thought patterns to help create some new, more adaptive, more optimistic ways of thinking about the world, or at least more neutral ways of thinking about the challenges and obstacles that we face. And then finally, this is how you can reach me. I'm on pretty much all of social media as at Solavi Holistic. You can reach me by email or phone if you have any questions about the content of this workshop or ways that you can start to make some changes in your life. So, thank you to Amelia and the Ellenville Public Library for giving me an opportunity to talk about this today.
And thank you so much for talking with us today, Courtney. We love having you as always. All right, I'm going to end the recording here.